Hello, I'm Rachel J, and this is Cultivator Kitchen. Today we're in my favorite place, my garden, which my husband and I did a complete garden transformation of this spring in just 10 days. Quick disclaimer, this is not the best way or the right way or the way you have to do your garden. We're not professionals. I just hope this gives you some ideas and motivation to get started. If it's almost fall or spring where you live, then it's the perfect time to put together your raised bed garden for the next growing season. Okay, here is the complete transformation and a time lapse of how we did it. Let's get started. Okay, here we are starting in May, which is just before planting season here in Zone 5B. A few years ago, we put in some cheap raised bed kits from Home Depot that were on sale, but we quickly realized our mistake. You can't really tell because it's kind of far away, but they were rotting, falling down, warping, gaps were letting all the soil out. It was a mess. It was also really hard to mow between the beds and control all the weeds, but we're about to fix all that. Here my husband and I are removing the old boards, and we're using thick cedar wood and metal corner braces to put together new 15-inch beds. Day 2, the shoveling begins. We decided to place the beds in 4 rows with 2 feet between each bed and 3 feet between each row. As my husband's putting together more beds, I'm shoveling all our nice rich soil back into the new beds as I shift them into place to form the rows. It looks super easy on film, but this was a few hours of shoveling. Okay, day 3. It got even colder today, so I'm in my coat. It's May, but it was 30 degrees out, so that's what happens when you live north of Chicago. Now we're doing the second row of new beds and lots of shoveling, continuing to remove the old boards and moving the soil around to get the new ones in place and keeping the spacing between the rows. These are standard size beds, 3x6, which will be much more easy to maintain and harvest from. The old ones were 4 feet wide, and I found it really hard to reach into the middle of the beds if I wanted to harvest something. Day 4, here we go. We're in a real groove now. Moving on to the 3rd row, we spent about 3 hours a day shoveling. Woo, I was feeling it. I got so strong after this week. I just wish I could spend this much time outside all the time. But you can really see how everything is coming together, much straighter and in defined, organized rows. Day 5, this was the most brutal day. We rented a manual sod cutter, and the amount of area we had to cover took us hours. We had only rented it for the day, so we knew we couldn't stop until we finished. It's really just 2 long heavy handles that you have to hold up with your arms and a horizontal blade on the end that you kick with your feet to slip it under the grass so you can remove all the sod. Day 6, okay, now we had to clean up the edges with shovels since the sod cutter was returned, and we started to lay down some weed barrier. We made sure the ground was about 2 inches under the beds, leaving room for gravel. We got the heavy gauge weed barrier that can support rocks, and that way we only had to do 1 level layer of weed barrier and not have to double up and do 2 layers of weed barrier. We used metal garden staples to hold it all down until we got the rocks. Day 7, next day, it's time for more weed barrier. This took us a lot of time because you had to cut and measure and overlap so there were no gaps. It was really essential that we took the time to have everything laid out straight and the ground leveled and cleared. It also was finally getting warmer. I think it was 50s that day. Day 8, you can see we put in our plant starts and our seeds. Things are growing. It's starting to look like a garden. It took us a few weeks to get all the rocks. We had a wrong delivery and some other snafus, and we finally realized if we want it done right, we're gonna have to do it ourselves. So my wonderful husband took our Prius and took 13 bags at a time of 50-pound bags of white marble rock. We ended up needing about 200 bags, so you can imagine how many trips that was. Here he's dumping bags of rocks, and I'm putting them into place. I tried to use a shovel or a rake, but the rocks were just too heavy, so I'm using my own legs and feet. day 9. We're nearly done. We had to order the materials for the final row of beds, and we ended up, as I mentioned, using 200 bags of rocks. You can see I'm nearly done spreading the rock, and we're putting in the last beds. I had some raspberry bushes there, so we're working around them. I'm trying to make sure that we can keep the raspberry bushes and just kind of go in over top with the bed, which ended up working out really nice, and we were able to save them. I'm really glad we went with the standard size beds because they'll also be easier to replace if something breaks, since the wood is a standard size. Day 10, the last day. On the edge of the grass, we dug out a nice curve and used plastic edging and more staples to hold it in place. Here we are coming all the way up to the edge of that with more weed barrier and gravel. We could have gone straight across, which probably would have been much easier, but it just gave it this really professional look, like we'd hired someone, and it matched better with our garden path. Now we've been enjoying our garden since June, and we're growing so much food. In the first row we have zucchini, blueberry bushes, and raspberries. The second row is all kinds of lettuces, arugula, 2 kinds of kale, purple mizuna, purslane, sweet potatoes, and gold potatoes. The third row is cucumbers, 5 kinds of tomatoes, lots of herbs, eggplants, 3 kinds of peppers, and finally in the last row we have mammoth sunflowers, kabocha and spaghetti squash, and a whole lot more cucumbers. While the squashes were getting started, we also had a whole crop of pink and purple radishes, which were delicious. I hope you enjoyed that complete garden transformation and seeing exactly how we did it. If you have any questions, leave them below, and if there are enough questions, I'll do a garden Q&A video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe below. See you next time.